Welcome to Prosecco and Prose, Episode 8.
This week's Prosecco is from Gooseneck Vineyards.
This week's prose is The Plagiarist by Greg Johnson. Thank you for joining us for an episode of Prosecco and Prose. I'm Wendy.
And I'm Amy. This is a deep dive virtual book club hosted by two English teachers and army wives who love to read and love the bubbly.
In each episode, we will feature a discussion on a novel from our local DC Metro book club.
Or we will chat about some of the latest and greatest pieces of prose.
We will also answer questions our friends send us in our sparkling wine box.
She said sparkling wine box. What an oxymoron.
So sit back and pop a cork for this week's episode of Prosecco and Prose.
For those of you who are listening in the car, please don't drink and drive. Save the bubbly for later.
So, Amy, you were out and about this past week stocking up our ever-dwindling Prosecco supply when you ran across a Mr. Vince.
Vince.
Who not only helped you pick out some new bottles for us to try, but gave us a great idea to add to our podcast.
And why didn't we think of this ourselves?
Maybe because we were a bit more focused on the prose and the editing and the getting this podcast off the ground. It's a lot of work.
Man, we need to live a little, right?
I mean, that's why we drink Prosecco every episode.
That's right. Now, Mr. Vince suggested we take a few moments to discuss our featured Prosecco with each episode, and we agreed that it is such a great idea.
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Vince.
Thank you.
Today's Prosecco is not one that Mr. Vince slid into my cart, but we chose the Gooseneck Vineyard Prosecco due to the point-blank language on the bottle, which will tie into our point-blank discussion of this short story, The Plagiarist. The Gooseneck Vineyard imports the Prosecco from Valsata di Piave to the vineyard in Wickford, Rhode Island, where Gooseneck tags it with their brand label. This vineyard was co-founded by two cousins, Liana and Paul, and they pride themselves on seeking out the best quality grapes for their products. Now, Wendy, do you want to briefly mention what we found out about this imported Prosecco?
I thought you'd never ask. The composition of the Prosecco is 100% Glera grape, formerly known as the Prosecco grape, that is harvested in the hills of the Treviso, Italy area. The neck of the bottle provides us its quality label of a DOC, or Denominazione di Origine Controllata, which is the most common Prosecco or at the base of the Prosecco pyramid. Yet the quality is still great.
It is.
As it is with this one. Your next level up would be a DOCG, and we will talk about that quality in a future episode. This bottle has an alcohol percentage of 11% by volume, and its sugar dosage is 9.2 grams per liter, which falls in the brute level of sweetness according to our Prosecco connoisseur chart. However, it has more of a extra dry sweetness to me, Amy.
It's really extra dry to me as well, and that is what the label denotes. Now, for some specifics from the vineyard. These are not my words, so please don't get me Gooseneck Vineyard for plagiarizing. I'm going to just go off of their tasting sheet that I have here.
Okay.
It says their Prosecco gracefully opens with a beautiful straw color, coupled with a nose of fresh citrus and whispers of tender apricot.
I taste the apricot. It's quite good, but there's a little something I'm going to work through while we're talking.
Okay. So now this next designation kind of makes me giggle. It says that bubbles tickle gracefully, as prominent notes of pink grapefruit are followed by flutters of green apple. It's like the little tiny bubbles tickle me gracefully. Makes me feel kind of sparkly. You know, the finish, as the label suggests, is crisp, it's refreshing, and it's stylish. You know, I can just hear my father as he listens to this episode. He'll say, "Well, how about that, Amy?" And then he'll smack his lips and go, "He's so funny." And he likes to poke fun at me, but it's all in fun. He's hilarious. I can't wait for you to meet him.
I can't wait. I have to say, I'm not sure about the grapefruit and green apple, because grapefruit is not a flavor I like, so I can pick it out right away. Gooseneck Vineyard suggests that it's best served as an aperitif with friends. It pairs well with salty foods, seafood, poultry, salads, mild cheeses, delicate fruit dishes, and this prose.
All right, friends, if this Prosecco sounds like something that'll tickle your fancy, be sure to check out our social media for a picture of the label and give it a try and let us know your experience. Now, we ask that you please continue to subscribe and share our podcast with one fellow lit lover each episode. For all of you Apple iTunes listeners, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcast as we are trying to make the new and noteworthy list. There are so many newscasts, political podcasts on there, but thanks so much ahead of time.
So our short story this week is The Plagiarist by Greg Johnson. And trust us, it is as intriguing as it sounds. We found this short story in the Yale Review. Just research for the Yale Review and then search for The Plagiarist in the upper right-hand corner.
Or you can follow the link in our show notes on our webpage, proseccoandprose.buzzsprout.com. Now about our author. Greg Johnson is the author of 2 novels, 5 collections of short fiction and poetry, and as the authorized biographer of Joyce Carol Oates, he wrote 3 critical works about her. Johnson is a professor of English and teaches in the graduate writing program at Kennesaw State University, north of Atlanta, Georgia, which is where many of his stories are set.
Mr. Johnson is a frequent reviewer for the New York Times Review, the Georgia Review, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He is the recipient of several awards from the Academy of American Poets, the Penn Syndicated Fiction Project, and the Georgia Author of the Year in both 1990 and 1997.
In an article by Gary Curley, and that's Kerley, in the New Georgia Encyclopedia, he called Mr. Johnson a clever observer of the emotional damage we do to ourselves, and that his characters' lives are often failures in some way, but he sees in their struggles the language of survival. I think that assessment, especially for this piece, is really spot on.
I agree. Now on to our short.
And our warning of spoilers.
Yes, spoilers will happen. They know that by now.
They do.
Let's start by introducing our 4 characters central to this story. Our antihero protagonist, Timothy, is 31, living at home, unemployed, caring for his dying mother, and though he has had dreams and aspirations in life, he's never had the gumption to follow through on any of them. I felt his only real drive in life now was to exist with as little effort as possible.
It certainly seems that way. Now, Timothy's mother, Lorene, is in the last stages of a form of inoperable brain cancer. We learn from Timothy that she had been a bit of a writer in her college days.
Just one of the many career paths Timothy considered at one point in his life. His father, no name given, has moved out of the family home as he cannot handle watching his wife die slowly.
So much for death do us part. No wonder he wasn't given a name.
Maybe. He definitely would love to see Timothy get a job and make something of his life, but he really is quite hands-off. He has made a very successful life for himself managing a large chain of hardware stores.
And finally, Debbie, a fangirl turned girlfriend of Timothy with writing aspirations of her own. This story takes place in the ATL in the late 2000s, as many of his stories do. Timothy has been caring for his mother for the past 2 years in the familial home, which was purchased for quite a deal in 1982, and is now worth upwards of $1 million plus. Small but important detail that could be overlooked.
But not by us. 2 word nerds getting into the weeds. Anyway, every day, Mom, who thankfully is not in much pain but very anxious, as one could imagine impending death and all, takes his Xanax after lunch and peacefully naps the afternoon away. During this time, Timothy would go up into the attic, and it was here he discovered the brown accordion file with all of his mother's writings.
Timothy finds these writings to be quite good, actually superlative, as he describes some. He considered himself pretty good in English in college and had written some stories himself. But in comparison to his mother's writing, Timothy tells the reader he's an okay writer, barely a good one. Some point-blank language for you, Wendy.
Yes, and there's a lot of it in this story. It's wonderful, actually.
There is.
Timothy and his mother have a conversation about her writings, and he asks her why she never pursued it, since she clearly has so much talent. His mother is vague, basically telling him she started a family. No one was making her write, so...
It was just easier not to. His mother passes a few days after their conversation. After the funeral, Timothy and his father are having lunch, an awkward one, apropos of their relationship, and Timothy asks him if he plans to sell the house, as Timothy would not only be jobless, he would then also be homeless.
Dear old dad does tell him yes, but offers to give Timothy 3 months, 1 more than the 2 Timothy asked for, to clean out the attic, burn all of his mother's things, as he tells his father it was her request.
Interesting. I think we will have to revisit that. I just had an epiphany.
Oh, okay. I can't wait to hear it. Oh, and Dad also offers up money or whatever else Timothy needs, since obviously his pockets are pretty dry.
And again, maybe he's feeling a little guilty for skipping out on his wife's last months. I still can't believe it.
Oh, I think there is a bit of guilt there. I also think that's why he doesn't really push Timothy to actually get a job. I mean, he was taking care of Mom, right?
Right.
So Timothy takes his mother's writings and decides to enter one of the pieces in a writing contest he saw in a local paper. First prize, $5,000, Amy.
Not a bad chunk of change.
Yeah, I agree.
Timothy had initially planned to submit the story under his mother's name as a little surprise if she won. But since she passed before his submission, he made a few tweaks to the piece, the title, he updated the references to make it current, and submitted this new piece under his own name.
While he waited for the contest results, Timothy worked on tweaking the rest of his mother's stories and sent most of them out to other magazines and contests that paid at least $1,000 per manuscript.
And at that time, that was good money.
Oh, for sure. I would take $1,000.
Absolutely. Biding his time, as he has no job, no friends, no social life to speak of, Timothy ate lots of pizza, watched TV, and checked the mailbox until one day...
I could get on board with his pizza.
Oh, I love pizza. It's Italian.
Italian.
DiGiorno.
Like Prosecco.
I hate DiGiorno. That is just crap.
That's not real pizza.
Can I give a shout out to my friend Clay Brashear in Richmond, Virginia?
Yeah.
This guy makes the most amazing pizza.
Well, I have to go.
I will bring you down there with us one time. Okay, back to the story.
Back to the story. But yes, the mail comes one day. He has won the fiction contest. An interesting side note here, this isn't part of the story, but the senior judge of the contest was from the Emory University English department, where Mr. Johnson earned his PhD and briefly taught.
What a fun fact. Back to Timothy, though, and his contest win. His horrifically described picture.
That was
that was so good.
You guys have to read just for the language of the short.
I mean, this picture ends up in the paper, which starts him on a new path of self-help improvement, as well as letters from fans. Enter here the not-so-thin Debbie, one of two ladies who sent him a picture. I have to share some of Mr. Johnson's fantastic writing here of Tim and Deb. Both were decidedly overweight, but I reasoned I wasn't in a position to take that against them. I really enjoyed his turn of a phrase throughout this whole piece.
Same. Debbie and Timothy go out on a date where she gushes over his skills at writing women's characters so intimately.
There was a bit of intimacy between those two in this story. Just grossed me out.
But it was exquisite writing, it was.
It was.
It was written so well. Their relationship blossoms from here, and Timothy starts winning more contests and getting paid for more published submissions.
Finally, following a suggestion from Debbie, he submits what he considered his mother's best story, The Biggie, albeit tailored to the times, of course, to a very famous and very well-paying magazine. His life is really starting to come together.
Isn't it, though? His health journey has slimmed him down. He has friends, a relationship. Even his father is proud of him and bragging about Timothy's accomplishments to his friends.
But it gets even better. At a celebratory dinner for Debbie's birthday, Timothy's father tells him he will deed him the house for $1. As business is good. Life is good. And it was, after all, Timothy's family home.
Well, now isn't that convenient? This very pricey home for $1. The final crowning achievement. His piece is published in the ultra-famous magazine to the sum of $7,500.
Wow.
Now that he has published most of his mother's work, save for a novel that he describes as a pretty transparent knockoff of Breakfast at Tiffany's, Timothy retreats back up to the attic in hopes of finding more writing gold in his mother's papers.
But what he finds is a book.
A book that was only checked out once to his mother, and in it lies the talent of all of her pieces. His pieces.
Oh, remember that epiphany that I mentioned earlier?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
When he told his father his mother requested she burn all of her things.
Oh, yeah, at their lunch.
As he said he would, he finally took all of her writings down to the fireplace and burned them.
Well, he should have had an epiphany when he lied to his father about his mother's request.
That would have saved him some embarrassment. Shortly after burning the evidence, he received his contract from the famous magazine with the plagiarism section highlighted. Timothy retreats back into isolation, now in his house, and begins to read his mother's, he presumes at least, novel.
It could be But then again,
Very true, which is a great stepping off point for discussing plagiarism. You know there are actually a few quite famous names who have fallen victim to plagiarism.
victim. Do you think they could be considered victims? I mean, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the word plagiarize means to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, or to use another's production without crediting the source. It's literary theft, Amy.
Well, I have the Merriam-Webster New Book of Word Histories, and the word plagiarism has an interesting history.
Why am I not surprised you have a book like this?
I just can't help it.
I love your library personally.
I'm going to read the passage from my book here, as I have always been enthralled with word history. The Latin noun plaga denoted a hunting net or snare used for capturing game. The netting of such animals was termed plagium. By extension, this word was also used for the crime of kidnapping children or freemen and selling them as slaves, the kidnapper being called a plagiarist.
Wow. That is a very interesting history. I guess the thief part comes from that?
That would make sense. We know in the time of the poet Martial, who died about AD 103, the word plagiarist was also being used to refer to a literary thief or plagiarist. The Latin plagiarius became plagiary in the 17th century English and was used for kidnapper, a sense now obsolete. And then plagiarist, now considered archaic, and then plagiarism, still occasionally found in modern English. The noun plagiarism itself was formed from plagiary and was used to denote the practice of stealing the ideas or words of others and passing them off as one's own. The verb plagiarize was also formed from plagiary, being first used early in the 18th century. Again, from my Merriam-Webster New Book of Word Histories.
I love etymology. If only I had stuck it out in my Latin class in college. But it was on Wednesday, and that was cheap night at the movies. So, I mean, what are you going to do? Choices, right?
Yeah.
I digress. But you do have to be so careful, as it is so easy to plagiarize after you've studied a text or documents repeatedly over a long period of time. The words and ideas tend to settle in your mind, and they really feel like they become your own.
Exactly.
That's why we both do this, take such scrupulous notes and denote where we get them, so that when I have to cite something, I have everything that I need. It's really just best practice to give credit to anyone you take words or ideas from, so you never find your name associated with plagiarism.
I agree with you. Now, as I mentioned, there are some very famous names throughout history who have tried to pass off someone else's literary property as their own. And we thought it would be kind of interesting to do some research on some of these noteworthy plagiarists.
Is that just because we like to research?
I love to research.
Same.
But it was a bit shocking to find a few of these names on the list. We now wanted to make sure that the stories were true, so we cross-checked info via several articles and documents and chose to use Jonathan Bailey's 2 articles from Plagiarism Today. The first one was a February 2015 issue entitled 5 Great People Who Plagiarized. And then the second one I found was a March 2009 issue called Famous Plagiarists, Could It Happen Today? They both had a wide range of celebrity and occupation to list.
And this first one was a huge shocker. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
Martin Luther King Jr., clearly an unforgettable civil rights leader and national hero, was found guilty after his death of plagiarizing parts of his dissertation while finishing his doctorate degree. His late wife had donated his writings to Stanford University.
Whoops. Bet she regretted that decision.
Exactly. He apparently had used portions of other authors' works in his thesis. It was also found that parts of his I Have a Dream speech were taken from Pastor Archibald Carey.
Didn't the article say, though, that both King and Carey's speeches had portions of Samuel Francis Smith's Hymn of America in their speeches?
Yes, somehow, some way. They should have footnoted the areas that rang similar in text. They chose not to strip King of his designation of doctor post-mortem. Most of the offense was done in academia and not in the civil rights movement, which made him so famous. He's still a national hero in my eyes.
Mine too. Now, the next noteworthy plagiarism case goes to the well-known chimpanzee scientist, Jane Goodall. She was found to have plagiarized passages in her novel, Seeds of Hope, a book about plant life, not the chimpanzee she studied for the better part of 50 years. The plagiarism was apparently caught prior to the official release of her book by advanced readers and reviewers, so she was able to fix her mistakes. She apologized and blamed it on what Bailey writes as chaotic note-taking. The book was finally released. Goodall, however, has a shadow on her name.
Goes back to explicit note-taking.
You know, I am a bit of a chaotic note-taker. I mean, I'm all over the place.
I mean, we're all guilty of taking quick notes and not denoting where they came from.
I agree.
The next case of plagiarism seems to happen often in the entertainment industry. We hear about it here and there. Remember Johnny Cash, Amy?
Oh, I love his music. I mean, Ring of Fire. And you know that song, I Walk the Line? That could be my theme song.
Yes.
You're waiting for me to sing. I said I was not going to sing this episode.
I wasn't waiting for you to sing.
Yes, you were, because you looked at me like, oh gosh, she's going to sing again.
No, I'm picturing you walking this fine line of proper and cool and crazy.
I'm not singing this time. I promised you I wouldn't.
Well, apparently, we're moving on. We're moving on from this. Well, apparently his song, Folsom Prison Blues, melody and lyrics were very like a George Jenkins song, Crescent City Blues. A lawsuit resulted and a cash settlement was paid to the tune of $75,000. 21st century money, that would be approximately $660,000.
Wow. This obviously didn't hinder his career too much, as this was the first time I had ever heard about it. You?
No, I was not aware. But, I mean, really, I wasn't shocked, as copyright plagiarism is one we hear about the most.
This next plagiarism case totally shocked me for several reasons. You know that students with special needs are near and dear to my heart.
Yes, mine too.
Well, apparently Helen Keller.
What?
Helen Keller, the first person to earn a bachelor's degree who was both deaf and blind, is on this list of literary lifters.
What? No way. No way.
Way, Wendy. Get this. It kind of makes me feel like I'm gossiping.
Well, do tell.
So I guess Miss Keller wrote a short story at the age 11.
Wait, can you do that at age 11? I continue with this.
She did, but it was called The Frost King, which was likened to Margaret Canby's short story, Frost Fairies. Miss Keller claimed that she had never read the short story Frost Fairies, but a copy was found that had been actually read to her. She said she must have forgotten being read that story. However, her story resembled the plot of Canby's short. Bailey, the Bailey we talked about earlier,
Yes.
writes that this instance is cited as an example of crypt amnesia. Crypt amnesia. Gotta say that. That's a hard one to say.
That is. I'm glad you had to.
Which, according to allydog.com, is a phenomenon that occurs in the academic world where an author puts forward thoughts and ideas as being their own, but that are actually inadvertent plagiarisms of work that had been read and absorbed in the past. Now, you know, I'm afraid of plagiarizing.
I'm always afraid of that.
I mean, I dream about all this stuff at night and I absorb it. I even listen to audibles at night that we're working on, and it just drives me nuts. I'm just so afraid that I'm going to start plagiarizing.
I know, and I just think, you know, at 11, like that's an age I've taught. They're absorbing so much. It's, you know.
They want to be you. I want to be you.
I want to be you. But, I mean, really, the important question is what happened to Keller? She was 11.
Well, she was 11 when she wrote the story, so her teacher, Anne Sullivan, and others were the ones who took the heat for that. She didn't have any other issues in her life.
I think that's a good resolution.
Absolutely.
I mean, at 11, I do think that they're just trying to write the story that they know.
But she made the list.
All right, let's wrap up this section with our last famous plagiarist, a poet, Amy, and playwright, T.S. Eliot. I know you love poetry. Was T.S. a favorite of yours?
No, not really. I never really enjoyed the modernist movement. I really honed in on the African-American poets during the Harlem Renaissance period. But I am familiar with his work and recall that there was a controversy when I studied the modernist movement during my undergraduate degree. But you can go ahead and refresh my mind.
Okay, well, remember that T.S. Eliot published the famous poem, The Wasteland.
Yes, I know I had to read it, but I think I enjoyed his, J. Alfred Prufrock poem? I love that more.
Okay. Well, I guess that several years after the published piece of The Wasteland debuted, there was a debate that Eliot took passages from Madison Casseen's poem entitled, get this, Wasteland. Moreover, there has always been a huge debate of the similarities of Eliot's The Wasteland and James Joyce's poem, Ulysses. The debate was always debunked with Eliot's piece, and we know his other works show, as Bailey calls it, an allusion or an homage to the previous work.
To me, that sounds so contrary. Hey, nothing new to see over here. All my work is based on past stories. I guess I was just never really wooed with his writing.
Right. Bailey wrote that in 1920, Eliot published an essay And in a passage from this essay, a famous passage, it's stated, quote, "Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal, bad poets deface what they take, and good poets make it into something better, or at latest, something different," unquote.
How convenient. Oh, by the way, I plan on illusioning in 2 years, but hey, this is my plan. To be continued.
Oh, goodness, Amy. Why so cynical today?
Just kind of moody today, I guess. I just feel moody.
You're just nervous about plagiarizing. We didn't plagiarize. We cited everything.
Absolutely.
But really, we can't make this stuff up. So I think I'm going to change the subject, okay?
Okay.
So speaking of plagiarism, have you ever had a student plagiarize? I don't see a lot of it at the elementary level, unless you count them plagiarizing my work. But you worked at the high school level. I can only imagine you had at least one experience.
Yes, unfortunately I have a couple students. But for the sake of time, because we've gone kind of long, I'm just going to share a funny, which at the time was not so funny. I had my 10th graders reading and writing about Julius Caesar. The students had plenty of time to get their papers completed. It was such a fun unit as we honed in on rhetoric. I was trying to teach them about logos, pathos, and ethos. Well, said student cut and pasted spark notes and left all the footnotes and the garbledy-goo in his paper. It was, Wendy, word for word to include the font from SparkNotes.
The font?
The font.
Oh my God.
He had several different fonts in his paper. It was just...
Well, it's easy to pick out when you've been an editor.
I had him stay after class to talk about what I found when going over his work. He swore up and down that it was his own work. I just let him carry on and told him that this discussion is going to be continued. I got the parents, and then I also had to get administration involved, as he just was not going to come clean. Mom, get this. Mom even said that she helped him write the paper and that it was his own work.
What?
I know. Well, she said that she helped him get started. It was kind of like what I called a 2-for-1 plagiarist special.
Oh my, talk about incriminating yourself.
Well, I sent Mom via email the passages that were cut and pasted. She came back and she told me that this was not the paper that he wrote at home with her.
It's not the part she wrote.
Right, probably. But administration said it was my call as how I wanted to handle it, which I was very thankful.
Yeah, that's good.
I just let him rewrite the paper for a 60%, and it was horrific. But I didn't want him to take a 0.
Right.
He still failed the assignment, but, it didn't cause him to fail the semester. But it was a big lesson for him, I hope. It just ticked me off, as the other students worked so hard in that unit, and I tried to make it so fun. Plus, he lied to me.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Just don't lie. He could have asked you for help, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's what he needed. I would have loved to be a fly on that wall, or at least in the conversation. You are funny when you get spooled.
Red?
Yeah, red rash running. Yeah, a little bit right now even. I'm taking a photo next time I see this and posting it on our social media. No, I would never do that to you. But I'm sure
you would.
I would never make you look bad, I hope. But I'm sure the rest of your students enjoyed the unit. Really, they probably weren't even aware of his garbledygoo.
No, I did keep it under wraps.
So you're such a good teacher. Don't embarrass him.
Well.
But this piece, it did make me wonder what kind of experience Mr. Johnson has had as a graduate professor of writing. Because things get tense in grad school, don't
absolutely.
they? And we did try to reach out and ask just that, but we're unable to make contact. So, Mr. Greg Johnson, if you happen to hear this, we'd love to know the backstory.
We definitely would. Now, this short story for us did not have any symbols that really stood out. So we're going to take a break from those this episode. However, if you guys find anything that you think we should have discussed, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We do, on the other hand, have a couple of themes we would like to explore. Hubris and the power of words.
Ah, hubris.
Love it.
Yeah, that's the one that will come back and bite you, right?
Mm-hmm.
According to the Bedford Glossary of Critical and Literary Terms, hubris is Greek for insolence. Hubris is when a character's excessive pride results in his or her downfall.
Right. And just a minute. Hold on. Let me grab my phone here.
Of course.
Look here at the Google Webs. Hold on. I've got my phone set up on speed for the dictionary.
We have to have it on dictionary.
Oh, let me refresh my memory. Okay, insolence is rude and disrespectful behavior. But I don't really feel like Timothy acted in that manner.
I agree. Isn't it weird how you know a word, but you're like, I just want to see the definition to make sure that that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. My dictionary is always open on my phone. However, insolence is also synonymous, because you know that other thing we need, our thesaurus all the time, with abuse, arrogance, audacity, brazenness, disrespect. I think he definitely exhibited those qualities, especially after his works, air quotes inserted here for effect, started to get published. But even, think about in the beginning of the short.
You mean when his mother asked him if he remembers his confirmation name?
That's one.
Mom wonders if he chose Luke because he was a doctor.
Well, just another one of the many ambitions dreamed about but never pursued. Instead, Timothy pops off with some rhymes of the name: fluke, nuke, puke.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, he even questions why he is talking that way to her, as he says he's not mean-spirited, and he really doesn't want to cause her grief.
Little rude, those unnecessary digs.
Exactly.
But I think his descent into his ego starts when he first puts his name to his mother's story for submission to the first writing contest.
I agree, because at this point, he has only said he's an okay writer, and that his mother's writing is far superior to his. But when he starts winning, starts losing weight, gets a girlfriend, he starts to take more pride in his appearance. He spends more time at the gym. He lies about how many pages he was writing a day.
Which he based off a famous author who had recently passed. More kidnapping, more plagiarism, one could say.
One could. Timothy starts to talk about his writing career taking off and the stories he was immensely proud of.
Remember the night he reads his biggie to Debbie? I call it the cash catcher.
Ooh, yes.
She gushes and oozes over him, telling him he's a genius. And he decides, she's right. It's true. He'd been too modest to think such a thing on his own.
He's not even thinking of the stories in terms of his mother any longer. He isn't. He calls himself a literary legend.
Ugh.
And tells the reader that if they thought his luck was about to run out, that it could not continue. Well, the very next day, he receives the letter that his pièce de résistance has been accepted into the very famous magazine.
He knows what this means. He's about to become very famous. One small niggling problem, he's about out of stories to tweak.
Oh, not to worry about that. Don't let that bog him down, right? He has the gift now. He is simply going to take his mother's novel, remember A House of Diamonds?
Oh, I do.
Well, he's pretty convinced he can expand the length just by copying the style. Voila. Now he is a novelist.
But didn't he consider it a pretty blatant knockoff to Breakfast at Tiffany's?
He did. And we will come back to that very idea in just a moment. But he also had dreams about how he will be praised for my ingenuity and literary savoir-faire.
Wendy, is that Italian, French?
It's Prosecco.
Oh, man. But he's really building himself up.
And it is quite the embarrassing fall for him.
His indignation when he realizes his mother is a plagiarist with such simple but exquisite writing. He clearly does not see himself in the light, only that his mother had somehow set him up. Brilliant writing. It reminds me of what Mr. Curley said about Mr. Johnson's writing as an observer of the emotional damage we do to ourselves.
Wow, there will be some emotional damage from that embarrassment. It makes my stomach knot a bit just thinking about it. It's that you got caught feeling. And it's not even me.
I know. But he probably didn't think it was such a bad thing to plagiarize his mother. After all, her property became his property.
With only $1. So maybe that was his thought process. Who knows? But he was ultimately trying to find a way to survive.
By doing as little work as possible. Sounds kind of like my plagiarist.
Yeah.
But last thing, power of words. We do this every time we do our final edit.
Every word counts.
It truly does. But you want them to be your words, or in this case, our words.
We do. Now, you mentioned how the novel A House of Diamonds was a pretty blatant knockoff of Breakfast at Tiffany's, set in Atlanta with an outdoor barbecue instead of the wild Manhattan party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking, when someone writes something new and authentic, there is power in their words that give rise to any myriad of emotions in a reader. It can be powerful stuff. It can make you laugh. I think you just read a book that you said, really brought some emotions to you. Make you cry, make you angry, anxious, sad, frustrated, irritated. I know so many books have done that for me. And then in conjunction with this topic of plagiarism, What about when authors do retellings of classic works? How does that avoid becoming plagiarism?
Well, most people tend to think of plagiarism as stealing someone's words, word by word, but it also includes stealing their ideas or concepts.
Yes. So again, how do retellings of classics avoid falling into plagiarism? So in my research, I found this blog, Reflection by Kimberly Jackson, and she had a post called, Nowadays Everything is Plagiarized, right? Very interesting read. I highly recommend it. She says there is a difference between inspiration and plagiarism. Inspiration may come in the form of setting, another character's point of view in a story, changing time and place. She challenges the thought of everything being plagiarized because of the argument that everything has already been written, but new writings can be derivatives. Even so, changing a character's name, point of view, setting, time, period, etc., one can still fall into the plagiarism trap.
So to go back to our story, Timothy did think he could continue his mother's novel in the same way. Her writing could be considered inspired or possibly a derivative.
Or even an allusion or homage, like you mentioned earlier.
Yes, but his would be plagiarism.
Yes, I mean, that's how I understand it. Though we don't know if hers would also fall under plagiarism, since so much of her work did, right?
Right.
So this made me think of all the retellings out there today and what changes were made to keep them from being considered plagiarized works. So thought it might be fun to point out a few here.
I'm curious. I bet there are a few of my favorites being retold out there. Did you find anything on The Great Gatsby or Romeo and Juliet?
Two great ones, and I did. The Great Gatsby has Great by Sarah Benincasa, a modern retell with females playing the parts of Nick and Jay. An intriguing take.
Definitely. I might have to read that one.
Same. I love that book. Romeo and Juliet has quite a few. Starry Eyes by Jen Bennett is set in modern-day California, so we have a setting change. Want by Cindy Pon is set in the future in Taiwan, so that's, a time and place, where the family is divided not just by the feud, but by class, wealth, and lifespan as well. Kind of interesting, right?
Absolutely, especially since Taiwan's been in the news.
Right. When You Were Mine by Rebecca Searle, that's a modern retelling from Rosalind's perspective. And one I'm curious about is, Anne Carroll has suggested this author in her series, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. Now this book is first in her Mortal Instruments series. It's set in modern-day New York and is described as a spicy urban fantasy adventure.
Man, those all sound pretty good to me. I know Jane Austen has quite a few retellings of her novels. Emma by Alexandra McCall Smith is set in the 21st century. She uses the same names, different time period. It's actually subtitled A Modern Retelling, so you know it's very close to the original. And then there's Pride and Prejudice. I know there are a few of those out there too.
Quite, actually. Pride and Prejudice may possibly have the most retellings of any novel. Aisha at Last by Uzma Jalaluddin tells the story from a Muslim cultural spin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Pride by E.B. Zuboy is a young adult retelling. Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe by Melissa de la Cruz is a Christmas retelling.
Oh, maybe we need to do that one around the holidays.
I know. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, maybe a Halloween one, by Seth Grahame-Smith is a mashup with elements of modern zombie fiction. And he actually credits Jane as one of the authors. So
that is so cool.
Right. So it's so close that he actually has her as by Seth and Jane Austen.
That is neat.
Yeah.
But now you can't forget Bridget Jones' Diary by Helen Fielding, another modern and very popular take on the story. Great writing inspires people, and Miss Jane Austen remains an inspiration. Oh, to have that kind of staying power.
It is incredible. Now, I found, you like The Great Gatsby and Romeo and Juliet. I found a retelling of one of my favorites, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So this retelling is called Dorian, an Imitation by Will Self. And it's the same name, the same story, but set in the 80s and 90s in the art scene in London.
Oh.
And instead of
That sounds neat.
It does. And instead of an oil painting, it's a video installation.
Oh.
Right. I want to see how this ages, don't you? These are just a few. We've got Hamlet, King Lear, Wuthering Heights, Don Quixote, Jane Eyre. The list can go on, and I'm sure it will continue to.
I have no doubt it will. But if it gets people reading and revisiting classics, I say no harm, no foul.
Just be sure not to plagiarize.
Yes, don't do that. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with theme or any symbols, but do you remember the passage when Timothy spoke of his mother's youthful handwriting, all the curly Q's and the T's crossed above the stem, saying how it meant she was an optimist at one point and then depressed in the next?
Yes, that was right at the beginning of the story, correct?
Correct. Well, Timothy recalls that he had been interested in handwriting analysis, and it just so happens that I have a copy of Jerome S. Meyer's The Handwriting Analyzer with an initial copyright date of 1927, and then my copy is 1953.
Of course you do. I'm not even going to be shocked anymore. Like word books, name books. How did you come across it though?
Well, my mother's late sisters, Allegra and Nadia Brelgi, were avid readers and collectors of books. My Aunt Nadia was also a writer, and I claimed all of her book collection after she passed. But can I tangent here?
Of course.
All of my books have been a point of contention in our military travels with my hub.
I can understand that.
Our moving weight was always so close to capacity, as I normally had 50 plus book boxes to cart around the globe. He just wants me to dump them.
We're teachers. We cannot do that.
No, I can't do that. And I know, and I won't.
Yeah.
I won't. I refuse.
We need this now.
Well, my Aunt Nadia owned this handwriting book, and this is why I had you write down that last passage for me last night. I wanted to analyze your handwriting and tell you a little bit about yourself.
Oh, shut your little sneaky self up. I was wondering why you were having me write a passage from Johnson's story word for word, but I'm really curious. So what did it say?
Well, before I tell you what and who you are,
Ooh.
I will preface it with what the book says about me.
Yeah, let's start there.
I don't want you to feel slighted or attacked. It's just so interesting, though.
I won't. I mean, and it sounds really interesting, but while you are spouting off about how you are, I may want to read over your notes just in case it says something horrific about me. Can you edit that out?
Yeah. Here, I'll give you this. Okay, you take
thanks.
a peek at that. Okay, so take a look while I continue with our friends at these notes. Now, in the book, the analyzer denotes if one writes on a straight line or on a slope. Oh, and which way does one's writing slope? To the left, to the right, or up and down? Does the writing run uphill? Does it run downhill at the end of a line? It looks at letter sizes, spaces between the lines, margins, garlands, arcades.
Wait. What? Garlands and arcades? Are we decorating here or what?
No. So garlands mean the bottom curvatures of the letter connections, and then the arcades are the curvature at the top of the letters. It also looks at the thickness of the letters, compressions or extensions of words, sizes of letters.
Okay, I get it. Tell me what it says about you.
Well, apparently, I am extravagantly high-strung. I'm temperamental. I'm egotistical. I'm restless and somewhat spoiled. I have a loud voice.
No.
And I'm excellent at entertaining.
We all know you throw the best parties. Come on.
Thank you. It also says I'm a good organizer and I don't delay tasks.
Now that is so true. Excellent quality in a co-host, by the way, when you have to do research.
I have a fine sense of justice and I'm interested in culture. I mean, it's pretty much spot on so far.
I would have to say.
Now listen to this. It says I have a business sense.
You do?
My hubs would laugh at that and say fake news.
A what? I agree with that.
He'd say fake news. But it also says I'm truthful and sincere. It does say that I have a one-tracked mind. That was kind of surprising, but there was so much more. We could hold an entire podcast episode on just the two of us and what I found. But I want to move on to you. Are you going to be okay with me sharing these findings?
I mean, now that you put me on the spot, I guess I have no choice, and I do really want to know, but I'm going to guess that I'm probably spoiled as well, right?
Well, let's find out. Now, there is a margin of error, but now remember, this is all in fun. Can I have my notes back, though?
Yes.
Thank you. So, you too are honest, sincere, and truthful.
I'm blushing right now.
You hold your composure. You're self-controlled. You are a bit self-conscious and maybe a little self-centered.
Amy, that's not nice. That's not a stretch. So far, so true. Keep going.
Well, the book notes that this may be the case when one is young.
Or when one is my age.
Mm-hmm. It says, though, that you have a well-balanced mind. You okay so far?
Yeah, carry on. This is very interesting.
Okay, so this next passage is so true. Oh my goodness. It says you are careful and accurate in everything you do, and anything you undertake will be done well. You are also a clear and logical thinker. That is so true. But you sometimes lack tact.
That's so true.
Now, I don't find this to be true, but now it did say that you are the, in quotes, idea man.
Flexing my man muscles.
Note this book, though, was written initially in the 1920s and then recopyrighted in the 50s. So in its next copy, it should say idea person.
Right, but I can be a man.
Maybe. But I will close up with your love of culture and good taste. We both were similar on that.
Yeah, you had that too. It must be our palate for good Prosecco, if it's under $20, and fine cheeses, if it's from Giant or Food Lion.
Or Aldi.
Or Aldi.
We get really cheap cheeses from Aldi, too.
We get very inexpensive. We are not cheap.
Oh, I'm cheap.
We have culture and good taste.
We got to keep this rolling. So
Okay,
lastly, you are a perfectionist and always have a desire for self-improvement. This is you, my friend. No margin of error needed for any of this analysis.
This is so spot on. And guys, we will post a picture of this old yellowed out book on our social media. So if you're interested, you can try to obtain a copy or send a writing sample to Amy. This has been so fun. Thank you, Amy, for taking your interest in handwriting culture to help us learn a bit about ourselves. Are you sure it didn't say I was spoiled?
No, Wendy, you just want to be spoiled.
That's true.
But I didn't want to miss this opportunity to tie in one of Timothy's fleeting interests. Now, I think that's a wrap. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Only that there are so many well-written and funny moments in this short, aren't there?
Oh, there were.
And it would be a shame for our listeners not to read it. But
and reread it and reread it and reread it again and again and again.
Yes. So, final thoughts on the Prosecco?
Well, I thought it was pretty good. It's a little burpy to me. I mean, I don't know, it's a little fizzy, but
I think it got a little warm.
I think so too, because we were upstairs taking some photos of the handwriting book.
We were. But I do have to say, there was one little tasting note that I know this isn't typical of Prosecco, and we'll get into that, but there was almost like a little finish of time in the aroma, the essence of it.
There was something a little savory, earthy in it.
Oh, savory, yeah. Love that.
Oh, wow.
Good Prosecco, guys. Check it out.
So guys, our next episode will be a novel, Follow Me, by Kathleen Barber. It's a psychological thriller.
So good.
So we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Prosecco in Prose. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you download all your favorite podcasts.
We would love to hear your reviews or special requests on future pieces of prose. We want to hear your voice as this is your book club.
You can also send your questions and comments to prosecco.prose@gmail.com.
Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at PNProse.
And on Instagram at Prosecco and Prose.
Find and friend us on Facebook. Just plug in Prosecco space capital N space Prose. I'm Amy.
And I'm Wendy, signing off as our bottle of bubbly is now empty.
See you for our next episode, and in the meantime, pop a cork and read.